Hey everyone, I'm Omogonix here and welcome back to a brand new Godot tutorial here on the channel. So today I'm going to be teaching how raycasts work in Godot, specifically 3D raycasts. If you've been watching my Godot tutorials for some time now, you would know that I've used raycasting before and taught how to use it when making certain tutorials, such as my working door tutorial, or the times I used raycasting for my basic horror game tutorial series. However, I wanted to make a video just dedicated to raycasting today, so you guys can understand raycasting better and make use of raycasting whenever you need it for your own projects. Also, I will leave a link to the Godot docs about raycasting for anybody who wants to read up more about raycasting in Godot's documentation and learn more about it. And without further ado, let's get right into the tutorial. Alrighty, so here I am in this project of mine. This is just a basic project I have set up. We've got the first person player controller here, and we've got some walls around here which we're going to be interacting with to, test out the raycast and stuff when we do eventually get to that. So first up, of course, what we're going to do is we're going to go into our player scene. And so we have a first person player controller here. Now, if you're making a first person game, for example, and you want to use a raycast for interaction, let's say, well, what you would usually do is, so here we have our player, and then we have our player's head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a child node of the head, so I just right click on the head of the player, and then just go add child node. And then you want to search up raycast 3D. So now we have a raycast 3D here, so when you do add in a raycast 3D, it will, be like this, just looking downwards. So if you want to have it facing, forwards, because, your player will be facing forwards, not downwards, well, what you would do is you go to the Transform tab here, with your raycast 3D selected, of course. And then you just change the rotation, I think on its x-axis. Yeah, you just change the x-axis rotation to like 90 degrees. And then you're all good. And then you just want to position it where you want it, and boom. So yeah. So now that we have our raycast attached to our player's head, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the properties here and what they all do. So first up we have the enabled bool. So basically, this determines if the raycast is enabled or not. So if you've got raycasts that you're using in your game but you don't currently need to use them for some reason, then you can just, turn them off, and yeah. And then we have exclude parent. So basically, as it says here in the little box, by the way, one thing that's very useful about Godot is if you ever want to learn about something, you just hover over its property, and then it gives you actual, an actual tip, like a little tip box here, basically explaining a description of what that particular property is. So on property enabled, it says if true, collisions will be reported. And then with the property exclude parent, it says if true, collisions will be ignored for this raycast 3D's immediate parent. So I think that's just talking about the actual parent node of the raycast. And then we have target position. So this is meant to be the raycast destination point. So by default, the y-axis will be set to -1. Now, if you actually change this to 0, that actually basically just gets rid of the raycast. So yeah, it's got to be set to something, to some sort of value in order for the raycast to be shooting out. So if you want to extend your raycast, you can just, just change this value here, and this will basically change the direction and the length of your raycast. So if we change the x and z values here, so if I change the x value, as you can see, the raycast is now pointing more towards the player's left. So now it's pointing more towards left. If you want to change the z value, you can as well. And yeah, so basically, this basically just determines the direction of the raycast and where the raycast is going to be, targeting. So yeah, so by default, I'm just going to set this to -1 on the y-axis. You don't really need to change it. When you're doing, player interaction raycast, you can just keep it as, the default target position values. But if you're doing a raycast for any other purpose, you might want to play around with these values depending on what you want. So then we have the collision mask. So the collision mask, this basically determines the layers that our raycast can collide with. So let's say, for example, in our level scene here, right? So here we have a static body 3D called Wall 7. And if we go to the collision tab here, as you can see, we have the collision layer and collision mask. So if my wall's collision layer is set to 1, but the collision mask of the raycast is set to 2 and it doesn't have 1 enabled, so it's just like that, then what that will mean is that the raycast won't collide with that particular static body. So yeah, so if you ever want your raycast to not interact with certain objects, then you can play around with these values here, the collision mask values. So depending on the sort of collision layer and collision mask values that are set on your objects in your scene, then you can determine if you want your raycast to collide with them or not. So yeah, that's what the collision mask value's for. It basically just determines the layers that the raycast can collide with. So then we have hit from inside, so basically this determines if the raycast can actually hit from inside the object that it's inside of. So as you can see here, my raycast is currently inside of a character body 3D, which does have a collision shape. So I'm pretty sure if we actually, enable hit from inside, that would then mean that the raycast 3D would then actually be, colliding with the player from the inside of it. However, if you have this disabled, then that means that the player will be ignored from collisions. So yeah. Now hit back faces. This isn't really something I play around with. I just leave it on by default. You guys can play around with it if you want to. Again, for anything you might want to learn more about, there is the Godot documentation links in the description below. But I will just hover over the tip box here and just read out the description here of what it says. Property hit back faces. If true, the ray will hit back faces with concave polygon shapes with backface enabled or height map shapes. So yeah. And then if you click on this little tab here, which says collide with, basically we have areas and bodies. So this basically determines the types of things that our raycast will be able to collide with. So areas, in case you don't know what areas are, well, area 3Ds are basically like Godot's form of triggers. So basically if you have areas enabled, this will mean that the raycast will be able to collide with areas or triggers, if you want to call them that as well. So if you have any triggers in your scene and you want your raycast to interact with them for some reason, then you can just enable this here. So then we have bodies. So this basically determines if your raycast can collide with bodies in your scene. So this basically means either static body 3Ds or rigid body 3Ds, anything that has to do with physics. So yeah, if you don't want your raycast to interact with bodies, then you can just disable this if you want to, but it is on by default, so yeah. And overall, those are all the basic properties of the raycast 3D. And yeah, so you can play around with these values if you want to, depending on the sort of game that you are making, of course. But anyways, now let's get to some scripting basics. So what I'm going to do is, with my Raycast 3D selected, so if you select your Raycast 3D and then you go to your inspector menu, and then you scroll down, you should see script empty. So this is where we create a new script. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on empty, go new script, and then make sure that for your path you do save it into like a scripts folder or something. So if you haven't created a scripts folder already, just click on the little folder icon I did and then click on this icon up here, and then you can create a new folder for your script. But yeah, so what I'm going to do is, since I already have a scripts folder, I'm just going to save it into my scripts folder, and I'm just going to call this, I'll just call it Raycast tutorial. And yeah, so once all that is done, you can now go create script, and boom, now a script will be created for you. Alright, so now that we have our basic script created, let's get started with some scripting. So what we're going to do to start off is I am going to get rid of the ready function, since we won't be needing this right now. If I do decide we'll need it, then I'll add it back, but for now we don't need it. So what we're going to do is we're going to be playing around with the process function here. So in case you don't know what the process function is, this is one of the more, basic and default functions in Godot. Basically, whenever you create a script with the default template, it is going to bring up the ready function and process function because they're basically like the two most basic functions in Godot. And basically what the process function does is it basically calls stuff every frame. So basically what the process function does is it makes sure that stuff happens every single frame. And yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of pass here since we won't be needing this. Hey everyone, so as I was editing this video, I realized that it would have probably been better to use the physics process function instead of the regular process function for the raycasting, and the reason as to why is because of how the raycast interacts with the physics, and using the physics process function allows us to make sure that the raycast is colliding with bodies consistently no matter what the frame rate is. So whilst I do use the process function in this tutorial and there isn't any issues with it, keep in mind that it would probably be better for you to use the physics process function instead when doing raycasting. And now that that's out of the way, let's get back to the tutorial. So what we're going to do is we're going to write if is underscore colliding. So what this is this is basically a function that is part of the raycast 3D. And what it is doing is it's going to be checking if the raycast is colliding with anything. So then we just want to do the two dots and then indent by pressing enter. And then if our raycast is colliding with something, what we'll do is we'll do var hit, so we're creating a new variable called hit, and then we'll go equals get underscore collider. So what this is doing is this is basically getting the collider of the object that our raycast is hitting. So that is what our hit variable is going to equal to, is it's going to equal to the collider that the raycast is hitting. So then down here what we're going to do is we are going to go print, and then we want to print hit.name, and this will print the name of the actual object that our raycast is hitting. So now that that is all sorted out, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to extend my raycast out a bit, because I do want it to be more extended out. There we go, about 1.5 seems nice. And yeah, so this is going to be our basic script for now. And yeah, so what we're going to do is we are going to go into our level scene, where our player is, and then we're going to test the scene out. And so basically, what will happen is, now if I go look at this wall here, as you can see, now we have all these, strings being printed out into the console. It says wall 7, and the reason as to why it says wall 7 is because that is the name of the collider that the raycast is hitting. So then if I look at this wall, it says wall 2, because this object here is called wall 2. Because if you look at the hierarchy to the left of the screen right now, it has the walls underneath a walls node. So we have wall, wall 2, wall 3, wall 4, wall 5, wall 8, wall 6, and then, it keeps on going down. And so yeah, depending on the wall that we look at, it will print the name of it into the console. So yeah. So that there is how you know if your raycast collision is working. And yeah, so now let's actually get to doing some basic interaction with the raycast. So just make sure that you stop testing by pressing the stop button, and then we'll go back to the script view where we'll do some more scripting for our raycast. Alright, so for the basic interaction that I'm going to be showing you guys today, what I want to do is I want to make it so then when we press a key, depending on the object that we are looking at, it will then get deleted from the scene. So if we're looking at one of the walls, and then we press a key, what will happen is then that object will get removed from the scene. So that's the basic interaction that I'm going to be showing how to do today. And I do want to show a few different methods on how to do it depending on how you are making your game. So yeah. So what we're going to do is, first off, you want to go to the project tab up here, go project settings, and then input map. And if you don't already have an input map for an interaction key like what I have here, what you want to do is where it says add new action, you just want to type in interaction, for example, or interact. And then once you add your new action, what you want to do is you want to press on the plus icon and then just press a key on your keyboard that you want that input to equal to for that action. So if for interaction you want E to be your key, you just press E. And then boom, now you have your interaction action set up. And how it happens is by pressing the E key. So I am going to remove this for now since I already have an interact action, as you can see here. So I'm just going to close this, and then you can press Ctrl S to save once you're done with that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go down a line on our script, and we're going to write if input dot is action just pressed, and then you want to enter the action name, so interact is my action name. So when we press the E key, what will happen is our object will get removed. And again, I am going to be showing a few different methods on how to do this. So the first way on how to do this is you can just simply go hit.q_free. So what q_free does is it basically frees nodes from your scene. So if we're looking at an object, so if our raycast is colliding with something, it will then create a variable called hit, which then gets the collider of that object that the raycast is hitting. And then of course the object's name will be printed out into the console. And then if we press the interact key, and then what will happen is the object will then be removed from the scene. So what we're going to do is we are going to test this out. So make sure that you are in your level scene or wherever you're testing it, and then we'll just press this up here. And now we're testing the game. So if I go look at a wall, so here I am currently looking at wall 4. If I then press E, that wall is then removed from the scene. And we do have an error here because as we were looking at the wall, basically what happened is it got deleted, and so then we got a null value here, which then caused an error. So if you do get anything like this happen for you, and you do want to print the name of your variable, what you can do is you can just go if hit isn't equal to null. So if the hit value does actually equal to something and it doesn't equal to nothing, then what will happen is then the hit variable's name will then be printed. So yeah, I mean, another way of fixing this as well is just by removing this in general. If you don't, because it's not like you need to print the name of the object at all, you can just remove this if you want to. But yeah, but if you do want to print the name of the object, you can just add if hit isn't equal to null, then print the name, and then that will fix up that little bug there. So now let's actually go test it again. So when I look at wall 4, I press E, boom, now the wall is removed from the scene, and we didn't have an error show up. So if I look at wall now, press E, it is now gone. And same thing with wall 8, it is now gone. So yeah, so that there is how you just simply remove objects from your scene by looking at them with a raycast and then just pressing a key to interact with them, and then boom, they're gone. And now we've got pretty much only now 2 more walls in this scene, I'm pretty sure. And then once we get rid of this one, then there are no more walls left in this scene. So goodbye to wall 3, the last wall in this scene. Goodbye, you are gone. And boom. So what I am going to do now is I am going to show you guys a few other ways that you can actually interact with your objects that your raycast is hitting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to create a new function. So let's create a new function by going func, and then you can enter in whatever you want for your function name. So as an example, I'm just going to do delete object, so that's going to be my function name. And then in these parentheses here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write node, or object is fine as well, object node. You can do whatever you want to write in here. It doesn't have to be specifically object or node, it can be anything. And then you just want to indent. So now we have this new function. Now what we're going to do is in this function, we're going to write object.q_free. So then we actually delete the object. So this is another way of actually interacting with our objects that our raycast is hitting. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually remove this hit.qFree line here. And so what we're going to do now is if we press interact, we're going to go delete_object. And then what you want to do for the parentheses here is you want to write in the variable hit, since that hit variable will contain our object. And then boom, that will be another way we can actually interact with objects. So basically what I'm showing here is that you can actually create functions within your own raycast script that you can use for the interaction when it comes to interacting with certain objects and whatnot. And basically what the object variable here in the parentheses is this is basically, you know, any sort of node that we actually put into this. So if you want to call this function, for example, you just put like a particular node into these parentheses, and then that will be recognized in this function here as that node. So yeah. So let's say, for example, for an object that your raycast is hitting, you actually want to access a function within that object because you might have a script attached to that object, and you might want to interact with that function within the raycast script. Well, what you would do in that case is you would go hit dot, and then you would just type in your function. So let's say, for example, you have a function called walk around or something like that, and then you do parentheses. And then boom, that's pretty much what you would do for something like that. So if you have a script attached to your object that your raycast is hitting and you want to interact with it, you want to interact with like a function that is on the script on that object, then what you do is you just type in hit dot walk around, and then boom, it'll just simply get the function like that. And if you want to check that your object actually has a certain method, before doing that method, what you do is you go has underscore method, and then you type in your method. So if hit dot has method walk around, then what you do is you then do hit dot walk around, and boom. So that's pretty much what you would do there with that if you want to access a function within an object that your raycast is hitting. And yeah, so those are a few different ways which you can actually interact with objects in Godot using raycasts. So you can either just, you know, if you want to do something as simple as deleting an object, you could just go hit.q3. However, if you want to like make a function within your own raycast script, so then you can do a bit more with the object when you do interact with it, then you just do something like with what I've done here with this function. And then you make sure that you actually, you know, you have a variable within this function called object or whatever. It can literally be called whatever you want it to be. And then you make sure that you implement your hit variable into that function. So yeah. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to test out this new function that I did for my raycast script and see how it all goes. It should pretty much just work like how we did with the simple hit.q3 line. So we look at our wall, press E, and then boom, it's deleted. So yeah. So what the function is doing is it's grabbing our object, the hit variable, and then it deletes it. So let's say, for example, there's objects in your scene, you know, only particular objects in your scene that you want your player to be able to interact with. You know, you don't want your player to be able to, you know, press E and interact with literally every single object in your scene, probably because, you know, they might just be walls or something like that, and you might only want like important interactable objects to be interacted with. Well, what you do in that case is, you know, there's multiple things that you could do, but one way you could do it is you could just go end. So let's say, for example, in your if input.isAction just pressed line, what you could do is you could go end, so then you could check for something else, and you go hit.name, you know, equal to, you could do hit.name equals to something, so you could do like, you know, if hit.name is equal to, you know, a particular name or whatever, you know. Or you could even check if, let's say, for example, end, and then what you could do is you could go type in a certain string, like wall, for example, end wall in hit.name. So what this is actually checking here is it will be checking if we press the interact key, and if wall is in the name of hit.name, then what will happen is then the function will happen. So yeah, there's multiple different ways you can go about doing it, but one way is by getting the actual object's name and checking the object's name if it's equal to something, or you could even get the type of a node and check the type of a node if that node is equal to something. So yeah, there's multiple ways of doing it. Just getting the hit variable's name is just one way of doing it. But so yeah. So if wall is in the name of the interactable that the raycast is hitting, then we'll be able to interact with the walls. So as you can see here, all my static body 3Ds are all have wall in the name. So theoretically, I should be able to interact with all of these walls here. So what we're going to do is we're going to test it out. And then when I press E, boom, I can interact with the wall because wall is in the hit variable's name. So if I was to try interact with an object that didn't have a wall in the name, then I wouldn't be able to interact with it. I will actually change one of these walls' names as an example to something like, we'll just change this one to RT as an example. And then let's go start the scene again, we'll test it out. So as you can see, I can interact with all these walls here, right, but RT, I can't actually interact with RT. I'm actively pressing the E key, but I can't interact with it, and the reason as to why is because wall isn't in the name of the variable, of the hit variable. So yeah. So because these other objects here have wall in their name, I can interact with them, but I can't interact with this one because wall isn't in the name. Another thing we can do to check what objects the raycast is interacting with, and to make sure that the raycast can only interact with certain objects, is to add them into a group. So let's say, for example, you have like a couple walls, or just a couple interactable objects in your scene that you want your raycast to be able to interact with. What you do is, so let's say for example we have this wall right here, wall 4. What I would do is I would go to the node tab when selecting the wall, so make sure you have your object selected, go to the node tab, and then in groups you want to switch to groups, click on plus, and then we can add a new group here. So this group, I'm going to call this interactables, and then we're going to go OK, and boom. So now that we have our interactables group in the scene, if you want to make it global, you can as well, because right now it's literally just attached to this scene. If you want to make it global, you can make it global if you want to, but yeah. So now we have an interactables group, and this is what the wall 4 is attached to now. So once you do add an object into your group, you will notice in your hierarchy that it will get a little square next to it, telling you what group it is in if you hover over the little square. So now if we go back into our script, and we get rid of this code here, what we can do is we can go hit.isInGroup, and what we can do now is we can check if the node is in a group, and then you just need to type in a string, the name of that group, and boom. So now let's actually test this out. So let's go play. So if I try interact with wall 7, I can't interact with it because it's not in the interactables group. However, if I go to wall 4, boom, I can interact with it because it's in the interactables group. So yeah, any object that you want to have in your interactables group will be able to be interacted with. In fact, I think using groups is probably the best way to do that instead of getting the object's name. So yeah. So anyways guys, that is the end of this tutorial. If you do want to learn more about raycasting, as I said before at the beginning of the tutorial, I will include the Godot documentation in the link below. So yeah, be sure to go check that out in the description if you want to. The Godot documentation is very useful for anything that you want to learn in Godot. So yeah. And again guys, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.